transplanting consciousness into a robotic body. The new Ghost in the Shell movie.
I don't know. What did you think about it?
Um, Actually, when removed from the anime and viewed as a separate movie, it was enjoyable. It was enjoyable. It was more touchy-feely about the issue of consciousness. The anime Motoko mentioned briefly that she was someone different as a human, that the brain belonged to a human, but she basically didn't think much of it. And she was this very kind of detached, very professional entity. And the movie one was traumatized by these visions and then finding out who her human predecessor was. And it was just the movie shifted balance into a completely different area. And as such, I found it enjoyable, and the couple of scenes that we mostly see in the trailer were just copied straight out of the anime, but it was its own movie that took many liberties and introduced many subplots and characters that weren't there in the anime. I found it enjoyable, and it was visually pleasing. And I don't mean Scarlett Johansson. I like her, but just kind of the neo-noir aesthetics kind of worked. And I know the philosophy of Ghost in the Shell was watered down. How the Doctor referred to the girl's consciousness as her ghost. It was such a catchphrase, like you have to have the word ghost in the movie to make a point.
Yeah, I guess for me, I don't know. I thought it was good. It was a little bit weird because I was at least in the circle of again, this is like another thing about the nature of modern civilization is in my world it was already so colored by the controversy of the Scarlett Johansson, the white Motoko, that thing. Going into it, it was like I had heard so many negative things just because of that. Yeah, a lot of people were upset.
Maybe I'm interpreting it that way, but to me it looked like Motoko was Caucasian woman with black hair, okay, but she had blue eyes. There was this one scene when she stares blankly into the sort of camera, and her eyes were blue. Not a thing that happens to Japanese people much, I think. And she, the facial structure, she looked European to me. And for example, people assume that since it's a Japanese movie, a Japanese story, it has to feature an all Asian cast. And it's not true. Take, for example, Sailor Moon. There was one of the main characters, the sailors, that was actually Asian. All the rest looked Caucasian, and the main character was blue-eyed blonde, and her name was Japanese. So don't assume that in an anime character who has a Japanese name needs to be played by a Japanese woman.
I mean, generally, I thought the movie was good, and for the reasons that you mentioned. I mean, obviously, the mother of the character was Japanese, so the spirit of the girl would have been Japanese, but in a body that wasn't the body was obviously a Caucasian synthetic body, right? So that was another interesting. Adds another level of bodily dysphoria, weirdness. What if your consciousness was placed into another body of another race, or of another a gender or something, or it's the same kind of dissonance that transgender people experience. Yeah. So it's
Yeah, and to go into a more sci-fi area, what if you were born a human and you consider yourself, I don't know, a cat?
oh yeah.
Yeah, you can go always go into the furry subculture.
Yeah, there's a lot of yeah.
Yeah, but what if there were in the future something like this came about, and you could actually either modify your body to look more like a cat, or have your consciousness transplanted into a synthetic feline body.
That'd be interesting. Yeah, and I guess well, generally for Ghost in the Shell. I mean, I was a big fan of Ghost in the Shell, the first, and well, I've seen all of it. I've seen this the series. I've seen what is it, the standalone complex, and I definitely thought the movie was definitely its own thing. Yeah, I mean, I didn't really have any problems with it. I guess well, jumping from there, the next one would be it's not out yet, but Blade Runner 2049. Basically, I find it interesting that all of these cyberpunk staples, the big cyberpunk franchises, let's Ghost in the Shell. I heard James Cameron wants to do Battle Angel Alita.
Yeah, that's been going on for over a decade, I think.
Oh, did he? I heard something about he's gonna move forward on it now because of this. Well, let's put it this way: Hollywood studios and the big money people are sensing Blade Runner 2049, which is coming out, does well, and it seems like more of the cyberpunk is doing well. There's going to be a desire for more and more and more of it going forward, and which is one thing. I mean, because Blade Runner is one of my favorite movies, of course, and so I'm a little bit ambivalent about what's going to happen. I mean, well, Ridley Scott, he's redoing his Alien, right, and his other big Blade Runner is obvious next step. Not just Ridley Scott, but generally his movies are being remade, and so more generally speaking, let's say 80s stuff in general is hot now because for several reasons. One of which is Generation X is all 50 years old now, and they're in charge of the nerdy, geeky 50-year-olds are all in charge of mega tech corporations nowadays. And I feel like that's part of it, and the kids, people who grew up now people who grew up with Blade Runner, they grew up with Terminator, they grew up with Alien, they grew up with all these things. They grew up with all the Marvel comics. Now they can make all the movies that they wanted to make. So I guess in one sense it's good, but one thing I'm a little bit worried about is that it is going to be too Hollywoodized.
Yeah, and there might be soon an oversaturation with these topics. The same way we're getting kind of way too much superhero movies right now.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
And most of them are just so forgettable. Actually, of the recent ones, I like the ones that actually have some fun in them. Like they poke fun either at the genre or just are more comedic oriented, like Guardians of the Galaxy and Deadpool. Because the serious ones are just trying to be way too serious, and they end up being so bland. Like my favorite franchise was the X-Men, and that last movie was just everything that was so bad about this franchise. That's just getting tired at this point. Like. There's always the issues between Charles and the Magneto. There's always Mystique, and there's always Jennifer Lawrence, who I also like, but a little bit of overexposure, I think, is the problem here. And same thing with Scarlett. I also like her, but at this point, she's getting kind of typecast as this badass, sort of detached femme fatale.
Yeah, to just prove that I'm not just totally an old grumpy old grandpa getting mad at the kids nowadays for taking my nostalgia and taking a shit on it. One good Marvel movie or one good comic book movie I've seen was have you seen the most recent Logan?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that one I definitely thought. Well, I think that's definitely probably my favorite comic book movie of the last at least decade, possibly 2 decades. Definitely my favorite Wolverine movie.
Yeah,
And
I actually forgot to mention it because I was focused on the comedic ones. But yeah, this one was good because it broke the pattern. It wasn't high action with explosions and stuff. It was more intimate, I think.
yeah, it was more intimate. It was more. What I appreciated of it was, well, it assumed like a certain level of not. I don't want to say sophistication, but it took the characters and the individuals much more seriously and gave them much more actual acting to do. I would say Wolverine, like Scarlet as a femme fatale. Wolverine was basically he had two expressions, right? Rage and slightly less raging for most of his career. I mean, I think that's why Hugh Jackman even mentioned that in interviews. Like, I'm kind of bored of this character because I just have to keep getting angry on screen and then I punch people and it's a stunt guy who does a lot of that. So, as an actor, it's kind of boring. I mean, I'm sure you guys all love Wolverine and obviously he made 7 movies of it. But anyways, I'm a big fan of one of the movies that he made earlier on after like 2 X-Men was The Fountain. I don't know if you've seen that one.
Yes. Yes.
And I remember him saying part of it was like, I'm kind of sick of doing this giant mega blockbusters where I just kind of blew this kind of monotone, kind of broody, angry guy that cuts people up, and I want to do something. So he went to Darren Aronofsky and I kind of asked him, can I be in this interesting, time super trippy, science fictional, big idea, surrealist, time travel, multiple time spaces, metaverse, almost like very very trippy experimental movie, and then remember that's a part of why he wanted to be in it was to do something totally different. And with Logan, so again, I don't want to go too far into that, but with Logan, this is one thing that would give me hope for something like Blade Runner or for future cyberpunk is with Logan, Wolverine. Not Wolverine. Hugh Jackman had reached a point where he had made so much. He is such a big name. I mean, I don't want to say I'm an expert on how Hollywood works, but part of it was he had leverage, right? He could come to the studios and say, "This is the last Wolverine I'm gonna do. I don't want to make it just be another one of those, forgettable comic book movies. So let's let the director really, write something interesting. Let's take a risk. Let's not just have all explosions." Let's have maybe a more adult. It was actually it was an R-rated movie. He got to say the F word, right? Like so many times, and that was a big risk, right? Because that's a huge risk if you're a Hollywood studio. You're going, what? Wait, this comic book movies is to get all the kids and the families and all the lots of tickets and right. And if we're gonna put F-bombs in there, we're gonna lose some sales. And so that was a big, so it was a big risk, but I mean, ultimately, so I feel like if you have somebody really big on the top, I feel like a lot of these movies, movies that become big movies, you have to have somebody like not I want to say enlightened, but somebody who has a definite division and has the clout to move, to kind of like convince the studios to give this idea a chance. Like another example would be District 9, Peter Jackson.
Oh yeah.
Right, without Peter Jackson, Neil Blomkamp, some South African dude comes to Hollywood, wants to make a movie, or some South African guy wants to make a big movie, like no way, right? But Peter Jackson, Lord of the Rings, Peter Jackson threw his weight behind Neil Blomkamp and said, "No, give this guy a chance. He has a really interesting idea."
I think the problem with a lot of cinematic sci-fi is that it's based on ideas that have been explored and tired to death in prose ages ago, and they're still trying to sell it in the movies as something new and great. And District 9 was innovative in handling the aliens as not the high-tech invaders who want to blow the Earth out of existence, but as creatures who settle down and sort of metaphor for immigrants and encampments as ghettos, and then the whole arc of the social worker being ostracized and sort of forced into this ghetto. It was just great because it was creative, inventive, and pushed something new. And I think this is really a way out of this kind of stupor that sci-fi is in today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obvious to me and obvious to people who have ever seen District 9, huge inspiration for Near Feud. Yeah, it's I always say I think that's of the last 30 years, District 9 is my number one science fiction movie of the last, at least the last 3 decades, for many reasons, but for the things that it pioneered, definitely. I mean, that's one thing I feel like, in books you can do a lot. There's certain things that movies cannot do. Like, well, definitely a 2 hour movie cannot do a really in depth, really deep story, but it can do that big visual, impactful. Just the image of that, that ship hovering over, but beneath it, this giant sprawling South African. It's kind of it's like the South African Shantyland refugee camp, and the main character, and the guy's transformation. There's certain things that movies can do that I feel like they lend themselves toward. I think that when you have a science fiction movie that respects the genre or that does justice to it, that's what it looks like, is District 9, or I would say something like Logan, definitely Blade Runner. I don't know enough about the current. I'm hopeful. I mean, I don't know enough about the current Blade Runner to say yes or no, and I haven't seen it yet, obviously. But I'm hoping that it doesn't suck.
Yeah, same here. And one other gripe that I have with the superhero movies today is that they're mostly clinging to material from the 60s, maybe the 70s. And that's so sad. So much happens since, and so many new things, such great ideas. And even, for example, The Watchmen. It's, I don't know, right now, is it 30 years old? And back then, it was a voice about a criticism of the superhero genre in a superhero comic.
Right.
Yeah, and they still make movies out of stories that this one criticized 30 years ago already, and nothing new. And with every reboot, we have to learn that Peter's uncle was killed. Batman's parents were killed. Do something new, for crying out loud.
Yeah, absolutely. It's getting kind of old, and I don't know. That's just. I mean, this is part of why I think, like, unfortunately, the best things I've seen, like, I would say, that were made by, let's say, Western, big Western productions, have been, until very recently, TV series have been. There have been some pretty. I don't know if you keep up with those, but there have been some pretty good ones. Not always. The comic book ones have been sometimes hit or miss, but some independent movies. But it's always hard to, it's hard to get the fun. I mean, movies are just such a big production, so it's just kind of an unfortunate nature of the beast, is that the amount of money it costs to make a movie limits the scope. It limits the scope because of money is risk averse. So they're gonna go for the easiest thing, which is the old tried and true, same old story. Unfortunately, unless you rarely have to find somebody who is internally an artist but has made it right, and so they can put their name and their prestige and their clout behind a big project. And I don't know. I hope somebody has actually approached me to make a Near Feud into a movie. I think they might be full of it, but if they have Peter Jackson, or not, sorry, if they have Michael Bay anywhere near them, I'm not gonna say yes. That would be unfortunate. Like, imagine Near Feud with just a bunch of explosions. That would be very boring.
Yeah. I kind of liked some of Michael Bay's earlier movies, and I actually, I might be in a minority, but I liked The Island, as washed down philosophically as it was. It was fun.
That was his?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. I was thinking of the Transformers. That's probably why.
Yeah, I didn't. I did not like the Transformers.
Yeah, I liked his Pain and Gain was pretty actually funny. I don't know if
Oh,
you've seen that.
yeah, except for the fact that it was based on a real life story that was pretty gruesome, and uh, the fact that he made a comedy, kind of a comedy that worked out of such a story is kind of tasteless.
Oh yeah, yeah. I guess yeah, that was pretty messed up. It's
Yeah.
the story itself. Yeah, that part's messed up. Well, I hadn't seen his earlier stuff, and I didn't know that the island was his. But I was gonna say it's better than the Transformers movies. I was.
Yeah, yeah. The Transformers movie was just so not what I liked the Transformers as a kid. And I think my gripe with the Spider-Man movies was also that this was not the Spider-Man I remembered because, for instance, we didn't get Spider-Man till the early 90s, and what we got was mostly the adult Peter Parker who was already married. So that was Spider-Man for me, not the teenage boy who just tries to get with the girl.
Right.
Yeah, I always dreamed of this more mature thing, and then in the mid 90s, we got the Todd McFarlane Spider-Man, which was, I think, the darkest and most interesting period in the comic. And there was this particular story called Torment, I think. And it was so dark. When I was a kid, I was scared of it almost, but. And at the time, I preferred the more lighthearted ones, but it was just so deep and intense, and I'd like them to have the guts to make something like that in the future. I don't know how they would make it would be possible to pair the guy running around in his weird pajamas into that kind of story. But maybe at some point we'll get to the point where we can suspend the disbelief. Where we can kind of stomach it, because I think the new, more serious costumes that the cinematic X-Men have actually work. And while I dreamed of having the yellow spandex X-Men when I was a kid, I think right now this would be ridiculous. I enjoyed much of the Batman franchise. Tim Burton Batman are just epic. Nolan's the second Batman with the Joker was cool. I liked what he did with the Joker because it was progressive, it was creative, it was out of the box. But I kind of still yearn for the kind of classic Joker with insanely big mouth and long teeth. And I hope they will make someday. And my dream would be the Killing Joke.
Oh yeah. Wasn't there the Mark Hamill? Didn't he do that in the animation?
The animation, yeah, but I haven't seen it, but I heard a lot of bad things that they added so much subplots to it that were not in the comics and ultimately watered it down. I might be wanting to say, but it was. In that kind of story, I don't want to see Batman getting on with the Batgirl.
Oh, I haven't
Yeah,
seen it.
because
So
I've read that. I don't know how intense it got, but yeah, the affair was a very important part of the animated movie, and that's not how I remember the Killing Joke.
Yeah, I have to say, I got some of the comics, but I didn't really follow it. Definitely not as much as it seems that you have. I didn't really follow all the stories. I kind of just picked up like here and there comics at one point. I did play. I play a
Yeah.
lot of the games, uh, like the Genesis
Uh,
Spider-Man.
yeah, I actually haven't played many other games because I was mostly discouraged by the uh, early games that were commissioned to studios that have no idea about the franchise and just made random beat 'em ups.
Oh yeah, yeah. A lot
Uh,
of them are like that.
so so yeah, so I'm prejudiced against the games, suspecting they're just there to cash in on the franchise and not to do any justice to it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. A lot of the early ones were, well, they were more, yeah, like Streets of Rage, or they're more like
Yeah.
fighters, I would say.
Uh,
The Yeah.
there are a few games that I'm actually interested in, and I kind of enjoyed the Arkham games.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
I kind of liked how much of the lore they were able to include in there, and I enjoyed some of the combat, but it got so formulaic very quickly. Like every goon had a vat of V at their disposal, and you battled the regular crooks, then eventually you had the pumped up version of one of the goons. And I think at some point after finishing the second game, the Arkham City, I was just so sick and tired of it being so formulaic.
I would say like, yeah, most of my experience were, yeah, some of the comics. I actually got a bunch. I had the cards for a while, and I definitely watched all the movies. I watched all the Batman movies. I watched all the. Unfortunately, I watched even the mid '90s ones that weren't so good.
Yeah.
Batman movies with the nipple armor.
Hmm.
That wasn't
Yeah.
too good. But
No, they're kind of enjoyable in the slapstick way. You have to watch it like for a lazy afternoon, the movie that you watch to just switch your brain off and have some laughs. And then you have to remember they were inspired by the 60s Batman,
yeah, I
which
guess.
was the studio's um vessel to cash in on the Marvel style, more comedic type of adventure, and went to insane lengths to switch it to comedy to make it more lighthearted, whereas the Batman is just a dark franchise. And I remember some of the comics I read in the 90s. That stuff was trippy.
Oh yeah, yeah. You ever heard of this one? I don't know if you might have heard of this. I think it was one of the artists from DC. He created this smaller, lesser known comic called The Max. Have you ever heard of that?
Nope.
You ever heard of that? Like Maxx. Yeah, it was by
Uh,
Sam Keat. I think he animated the Sandman, Neil Gaiman's Sandman. I don't know if you're familiar with that. And he also worked for.
yeah, I know that one. Haven't actually read it, but I know it.
Yeah, and it's yeah, he worked for DC Comics, and but yeah, it was the MTV actually released a TV series in the late '80s or '90s, maybe late '80s, called The Max. That was one I really liked. That one I watched. I have all the comics of that one, and I watched the entire TV series. I think it was like 2 seasons. It is, yeah, that one is like pretty trippy, pretty out there. And the main character is he's a superhero, but he's a homeless bum in a purple suit. He's like, yeah, he's a hobo superhero, and his best friend is like a social worker in like inner city New York, I think, and like he's like basically he's a crazy person. and she has to like bail him out because he gets into fights with like drug dealers, and he beats up some guys who are trying to like mug a lady, and then he gets busted and he gets thrown into jail, and then it also has like half of it takes place in the real world and half of it takes place in the dream world, which is like it goes to the Australian outback, which is really weird. It's like this alternate reality where everything is flipped, like and like the buildings turn into giant walking beasts, and trying to think of an example, almost like Silent Hill, but not Silent Hill, but like where everything in the real world is like has an alternate existence in this ethereal plane, and the art style is just really great, and the story was really great. Definitely not your run of the mill superhero kind of story. I think it was the main guy was an animator for DC, and he got really tired of doing the same old big guys punching each other in the face, and so he made the Max, which is I recommend you checking it out. I mean, if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, I will. Well.
And you look good. Just MAXX. He's this big purple guy with golden. He's a big giant purple guy. Yeah, he looks like the Hulk, but with his face looks like a bunny rabbit. It's really funny. Yeah. Anyways, yeah, that's my favorite one.
Let me see. Yeah, got it.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, and my wife loves the Sandman. I haven't read the entire thing myself either. I know of it though. Because Neil Gaiman. I was gonna cosplay as the Max at one of the cons one year. That didn't happen though, because I couldn't find a purple jumpsuit. So, all right, everybody. So, thanks for tuning in to the Silver Spook podcast. I'm Silver Spook of Silver Spook Games / Christian Miller. You can find my stuff at what is it? Just Google Silver Spook Games. Neofeud is the game that I have out. It's going to be coming out on Steam at some point. It's already out on itch.io. Buy it now, and you get a free Steam key when it comes out. Dysmaton is the game I'm currently working on. Dysmaton. And you can play a demo of that from also itch.io.
So I'm Fitz, and you can find my games either through the Adventure Game Studio forums, or you can Google the one that's most Googleable, and this one's called The Unprintable Magenta. Or you can try Monty the Komodo Dragon. Or you can try my online comics, which are now defunct and have been for a long time, but they're still there. They're on the Duck webcomics, and they are called A Bit Cheesy. And then there was my other comics, comic Chomp. And I also go as Fitz on the Duck webcomics.
Thanks everybody for listening in or possibly watching the still image for long periods of time. I hate doing this part because I can't think of a good way to sign off. Bye. All right. You can say goodbye. Say goodbye in Polish.
Cześć. Cześć i czołem. Siemka.